Hey, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Your screen?
Okay.
I think anyone who's
So,
not on the phone might not be able to. Is
got
that
it.
Justin on the phone? I guess not.
Okay, so I think we'll get started now. Thank you guys for being on the monthly advocacy call. This call shouldn't be that long, but we just want to talk about our main priorities for October, give you guys some background on the conflict regions we'll be working on and what the specific legislation is, and then talk about how we'll actually be carrying out our advocacy for each of our campaigns this month. But before we talk specifically about advocacy, I wanted to just hear from you guys how outreach is going. So if the 3 state leads who are on the call could just talk about what cold outreach they've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and how it's going in terms of getting more contacts in your state, that would be great. Does anyone want to volunteer to go first, or should I call on people? Okay, I'll call on people. Let me just see who's on. Hannah? Do you want to go first and talk about outreach?
Sure. So I haven't been super successful yet. I have gotten 2 people that weren't already, well, I got a couple people that I knew already at the beginning of the school year, and then I got 2 people recently. I've just been emailing people. So yeah.
Cool, sounds good. Nicole, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Outside of just asking like friends, family members, and other people that I know to try to call their representatives about initiatives, I haven't really been sure how else to be trying to conduct outreach, or specifically like what to be telling people to do other than that.
Yeah, I think the other option, other than just reaching out to people that you know, would be cold outreach, which I think we said we would talk about more, but never really got around to. So just finding like universities and finding professors' emails online and sending emails to as many people as possible is one thing you can try. It's not always that effective. Like a lot of people just won't respond, but it's definitely another option. And I don't know if other people have things that have worked for them that they maybe want to share. Megan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in touch with a couple of organizations in my area. I've been in touch with Peace Action, with Jewish World Watch, and with the Museum of Tolerance. And I haven't been doing a ton of cold outreach, but I was planning on emailing some people like at UCLA. I've been like kind of in touch with people at Claremont McKenna because we're trying to plan a conference. But other than that, like, yeah, just like friends and family, and I was planning on doing some cold outreach. It's kind of difficult because I wasn't sure, like, yeah, I need to be more inclusive of like the rest of the state, like Northern California, just because it's like such a big state, which is kind of difficult, but yep.
Okay, cool. And we're also going to try to get people to message more in our Slack channel and share their ideas for outreach and what's worked and hasn't worked for them. So especially if you guys want to start that conversation after this call, that would be great. It's always nice to have someone other than me starting the conversation there, and have as many people as possible share their ideas for outreach. So the main purpose of this call is to talk to you about our 3 advocacy priorities for this month. So the first one is about refugees and opposing what Trump has done to cut down the number of refugees that can enter the US. The second is a continuation of the Yemen stuff we talked about in September, but we've actually changed our ask now, so we're focusing on new legislation, and we'll talk about that. And the third is the Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act, which I think we talked about a little bit on our last call, but this is something that Stan's been working on for a while, and we're going to spend the second half of October doing more advocacy for this. So I think Mac was going to talk a little bit about our refugee advocacy.
Yes, I'm happy to. So, as many of you know, STAND has been working for the past couple of years against legislation that limits refugee resettlement in the US. And in the past, I guess, 9 or 10 months since the Trump administration has come into place, we've really had to quickly mobilize against the earlier iterations of the travel ban, which I'm sure most of you are pretty aware of and have read a lot on. What I think a lot of people don't know about, just because there's been a lot of other things in the news recently, is that Trump recently added additional countries to the travel ban. So he took Sudan off of the travel ban, but he added Chad, Venezuela, and North Korea. So some experts are saying that now it is no longer a Muslim ban because Venezuela and North Korea are not majority Muslim countries. However, a lot of folks in the refugee resettlement sphere are challenging that. The ACLU is also challenging that. They're suing the administration for just to continue the court cases against the travel ban. Basically, the reason that folks are saying that it's still illegal is that we already let very few people in from North Korea and Venezuela. North Korea in particular, I believe, has had less than 10 people from North Korea enter the country in the past 5 years or so. So it's clearly kind of an elephant in sheep's clothing, wolf in sheep's clothing type thing where, they're just trying to, cosmetically show that it is not a Muslim ban, whereas it still is. So we are opposing the travel ban on the ground that it's immoral to block refugees from certain countries from coming. And so that's the first part of this issue. The second part is that about a week and a half ago, I think, the administration announced that the US will set the refugee admissions cap at 45,000 refugees for the 2018 fiscal year, which is the lowest that the refugee resettlement program has ever seen since it came into existence in 1980. To put that in perspective as well, the Obama administration in their final year in office, set the refugee resettlement cap at 110,000. So really, it's a huge, huge cut. And that mixed with the travel ban means that people who really, really need resettlement won't be receiving it. Another piece of this is that the US is often kind of a country of last resort for people. So, for example, some of the most at-risk populations, for example, like LGBT refugees who wouldn't be safe in certain countries that have laws against LGBT folks, are often resettled to the US because it's a much safer place to be. So it really is putting people at risk by lowering this number. Not to mention that, we have the highest level of displacement that the world has ever seen in at least recorded human history. So it's absolutely unconscionable that we have the resources to resettle way more people than this, and yet we're cutting it and we're blocking people from certain countries from coming. So that is the basic. Amala, do you want to go to the next slide? So this action, which you may have seen on our Facebook and also on Slack, is that there are several representatives who are circulating a letter to the Trump administration asking them to increase the resettlement number to 110,000 for fiscal year 2018. So we are asking people to call their representatives in order to ask them to sign on to this letter. And so all offices have received it. The representatives who have led on it have made sure that it's gotten to every office. But many offices have not yet signed on. And I put in Slack on the general channel all of the offices that have already signed on. So if you're curious as to whether your representative has or has not signed on, then you can look at that. I think probably the only person that that's relevant to is Hannah, because Jim McGovern has signed on to it. But you might want to check on your home rep, Hannah. But we would love it if you guys could mobilize some calls before the end of the day on Friday, because that's the deadline for signing on. And this is currently the best vehicle that we have legislatively to influence the Trump administration on this. So we'll keep you posted if other legislative opportunities come up related to this, but this is kind of the main action that NGOs are taking on right now. Does anyone have any questions about this? It's also up on the Stand Facebook page and the Stand Twitter and such, so we'd really appreciate it if you guys liked and shared that post. It really helps it get out to a wider audience as well. So please do that.
The second thing, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, on to you.
The second thing we wanted to talk about is Yemen. And so, as you know, if you were on the call last month, the current conflict in Yemen is that you have a civil war going on between the Houthi rebels and the government is backed by a coalition led by Saudi Arabia. And the way that the US is involved is because this Saudi-led coalition is using American weapons. They're using the weapons they get through arms deals with the US to then target civilians and bomb them in Yemen. And so House Concurrent Resolution 81 is a new piece of legislation that was introduced by Representative Ro Khanna from California. And what this does is it invokes a part of the US War Powers Resolution, which says that only Congress can declare war and Congress is responsible for this. And it points out that Congress never declared war in Yemen or never even authorized US forces to support Saudi Arabia. And as such, it calls on the president to remove US troops and US assistance from the war in Yemen. So if this would be really beneficial if it passed and the US was no longer supporting Saudi Arabia and no longer assisting them as they target civilians. In terms of our advocacy for this, we have the op-eds from our previous advocacy related to Yemen. I think most people haven't submitted theirs yet, so this is an opportunity to edit it to include this new ask so that it's very timely. The rest of the op-ed can stay the same, the part where we talk about the conflict in Yemen and how US involvement is bad and civilians are being targeted. But if you want to add 1 to 2 sentences about this legislation and calling on your representatives to sign on and support it, that would be great. The other thing is call-ins. We have the call-in graphic here that I'll also share in our channel in Slack. This is something you would do after refugee, so we're thinking of doing a big push next week because this will likely be voted on at the end of next week. So if you can share this call-in graphic, get as many people to call as you can, and make sure to keep calling your own representatives, that would be fantastic. We're really hoping to mobilize a lot of people and make sure the representatives vote yes on this. And then the last thing is that Stand has created an action guide that we'll be sharing with our chapters. So it's ways for them to host like a lemonade stand to raise money for Yemen and to encourage people to call their representatives and raise awareness. We've also created an educational video about the conflict that has ways that people can take action. So I'll be sharing these resources with you guys, and we hope that you can then share them with people in your states and spread the word about what's going on. Those are the main things for Yemen. I know I went a little bit fast, so does anyone have questions or thoughts about that? So the last thing we wanted to talk about is GAPA, or the Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act. This is a piece of legislation that STAND has been working on for a while, and it does three main things to improve the US government's ability to prevent and respond to genocide. The first thing it does is it establishes a mass atrocities task force, which would be an interagency working group with high-level officials from the State Department, from Treasury, the Justice Department, USAID, the White House, several departments coming together to coordinate strategy across multiple departments to make sure that the US has a unified approach to genocide prevention and can be as effective as possible. This is based on something that President Obama created in an executive order. He created the Atrocities Prevention Board, which was very similar, but it was housed at the White House and had representatives from all these different departments, and was pretty effective in terms of identifying regions where we need more funding or the US needs to respond quickly in order to prevent mass atrocities from occurring. The second thing it does is it mandates that US Foreign Service officers be trained in recognizing early warning signs and then mitigating violence if it occurs. So the people who are actually on the ground there and in embassies are the ones who are going to see firsthand when violence starts and when there are signs of emerging genocides. So it's very important that they're able to recognize when that's happening, and that they then know how to respond to it, even if they can't get the support they need from the federal government and takes a while for things to happen. Because bureaucracy, if the people on the ground know how to actually deal with it, it'll make it a lot easier for us to prevent mass atrocities. And then the last thing is the Complex Crises Fund, which has existed before outside of this legislation. But the idea is that this is basically a fund through USAID and the State Department that allows us to send money very quickly to emerging conflicts. So normally when a conflict occurs and violence breaks out, it's hard to get money there just because of the way the budget works. It's going to be very slow to get it through Congress and get money approved to be allocated to this region. But the Complex Crises Fund, we don't really need to worry about these regular budgetary cycles and can just quickly send money where it's needed most. I think this has actually already been used in places like Burundi and the Central African Republic, and has helped the US respond really quickly and get resources to the people who are most vulnerable and need them the most. So those are the basics of the legislation. We're focusing on the House bill, which is HR 3030, and this is something that we want to focus on after we finish our refugee advocacy and our Yemen advocacy. So I think the third week of October. We're hoping to have a call-in day, and we'll let you know if we decide on one day when we want everyone to call their reps and encourage as many people to call their reps as possible. I listed some of the targets here that are from states where we have state advocacy leads. Obviously, even if your representatives aren't on this list, if they still haven't signed on to this legislation, you should be calling them and sharing our call-in graphic and making sure to mobilize as many people as possible. If your representatives are on this list, it's even more important to spread the word and make sure that you're really pressuring them to vote yes on this. Since this is going to be later in the month and Yemen op-eds are mostly done, we're also going to have each member of the advocacy task force write an op-ed about GAPA and get that placed as well. Op-eds are one of the most effective ways of doing advocacy because they simultaneously raise awareness and educate the general public about what's going on and what the legislation is, and they also pressure representatives and call them out for not voting on this. So we will be sharing more educational resources on this and talking points that you can use to write your op-eds in the advocacy team channel and Slack in the next few days. But just something to keep in mind if you want to start doing research, even go ahead with that. Any questions about GAPA? Okay. Does this sound like a reasonable timeline to everyone, spending the rest of this week on refugees, the week after on Yemen, and then the rest of October on GAPA? Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the very last thing is we just wanted to talk to you about Stan's Lobby Day. Mac definitely knows more about this than I do, but Stan is going to be having a Lobby Day in November. It's going to be 2 days, one day when I think we'll talk to people about advocacy and our conflict regions, and one day when you lobby your representatives on Capitol Hill. We'd love to see some of you there. Mac, do you want to talk more about it?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, absolutely. We would love to have as many of you there as possible. A lot of schools offer funding for students to come to different conferences and things. So definitely look into your school for different funding opportunities. We're trying to keep it as affordable as possible. So registration is $20 a person, which basically covers food and the basic expenses that it takes to put it on. But we also, if that is going to be hard for you because you're putting up money for a plane ticket or things like that, we do have fee waivers available that, especially if you are one of our student leaders, we are happy to give to you. So it's going to be in Washington, D.C. For those of you who might not be able to attend, and I encourage you all to look into your November schedule as early as possible to try to attend. But if you're unable to attend, we'd really like to encourage you to do in-district lobbying that week. And so we're talking about doing a webinar the week before on how to lobby. And we'll have all of the materials for you. We always have printouts for staff members that we bring to the Hill when we are advocating on issues. So we'll have those available to you if you want to do district lobbying. And then we also always come up with some sort of a lobby day script so that you can practice what you're going to say when you're in your meeting and such. So I think that most students find that it's one of the most valuable things and one of the biggest skills that they develop while being part of STAND. You generally meet with, if you're in DC, you generally meet with a foreign policy staffer who's pretty well versed on these issues, but it's really valuable for them to have constituents talking directly to them. It's probably the next best thing you can do is write an op-ed targeting them, but having the face-to-face contact and having a staff member in the office who you can contact directly if there's something like a sign-on letter is really super effective. Like there are several members of Congress for whom I know staff contacts pretty well, and I'm just able to email them directly if there's a sign-on letter. Because staff members are so busy, they really need people on them and reminding them about things like this, especially with all of this stuff that's going on with domestic policy right now. Sometimes foreign policy falls off the radar. So yeah, we really hope to see you there. Definitely get in touch if you are interested in looking for affordable housing options. There's a lot of really good and really central hostels that you can stay in. We also have a lot of tips for finding cheap travel and such. So we definitely want to do everything we can to help you get there. And if anyone has any immediate questions, I'm happy to answer, but also feel free to grab me on Slack at any time as well.
Okay. Thank you all for being on this call. I hope this was helpful. Before we finish, does anyone have any last minute questions on Lobby Day or outreach or any of the three things we talked about?
Yeah, I
yeah.
I can go.
Hello? Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is specifically about outreach. So contacting representatives and contacting professors and things like that, and also sending op-eds. So specifically when it comes to sending op-eds, so Can we, like, where exactly are we supposed to, like, can we send them anywhere we want to? All, like, besides, like, the places, like, we already, like, talked about? Like, I'm kind of confused, like, where else can we send op-eds?
Yeah, so
Like what publication? Yeah, you go.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've been in touch with Amala already about publications, but usually local or state papers are some of the most effective places. A lot of college campuses, less so high school, but some high schools also have newspapers. But college campuses often have newspapers that will print pieces written by students. And we are happy to help you write a pitch for it or help you find contact information for a newspaper. I think probably the best thing to do would be to start like a private message in Slack between yourself and Amala and I, and we can help you find the best paper who might be willing to print your piece. Is that helpful?
I mean, like, yeah, I already get that part. I'm just wondering, like where else can we send them? Like, is just like locally is the best way to go about things? Or, like, do we ever have like a op-ed published by like the New York Times or something crazy like that? Like, has that ever happened? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we are working on the national level, but for this type of advocacy where you're trying to, in particular, target a specific senator or representative who is specific to your state or specific to your local area, it actually is really effective for it to come from in district because they know that it's constituents who are seeing it, that it's constituents who wrote it. So that's actually part of the strategy, and it's much, 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 much easier to get published in a local paper than to get published in like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. Like,
yeah. True.
Yeah, we just that on the national level, but it's actually we quite often get published in local papers. So yes, that is what we suggest for these.
But also just jumping in, this is Savannah. I think if you have interest in doing something kind of at a higher level publication, I think when we hired all of you guys as state advocacy, we said if there's anything you're particularly interested in working on, we'd be happy to work with you on it, or if there's anything beyond the scope of what we're already suggesting. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to shoot us a message and we can work on like an additional side project or pull you into some of the national work.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're happy to, if that's something that you would like to be involved in, and this goes for anyone with any kind of sub-projects or campaigns you see, we're happy to touch base with you or like let you get the most out of it. So if you're interested in kind of the national, like the higher level non-local publishing, we can work with you on doing some of that in addition to the local publishing.
Cool. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it definitely answers my question. So.
Cool. Somebody else had a question.
Megan.
Yeah. I had a question as well. So my question is also about outreach, just about like cold outreach. How would you suggest going about like that first email, I guess, because like it would be kind of, I don't know, I just don't, yeah, it would be kind of awkward to just send a first email with these asks. So I was wondering like how you form that relationship.
Yeah, so I personally suggest like having one kind of concrete issue that you are asking them about. Just because I think if you don't have a specific ask for them, they're kind of unclear on what you're trying to do and who you are. But I'm sure we have some sort of a template that we've used in the past that we could adapt and have other state advocacy adapt. But we usually suggest like kind of introducing yourself as a student from whatever school you're attending, explaining like in a sentence or two what STAND is doing, kind of lining up like where your shared values are. So if it's an Amnesty International chapter, obviously international human rights are a huge kind of shared interest of both of ours, even though we're a bit more specific than Amnesty's like broader goals, but we often work with Amnesty chapters, and that's a really good place to start. For like Holocaust museums or something, I think that there's a lot of ways that we can engage with those organizations, in that we work on genocide prevention in particular, and so kind of bringing the memory of the Holocaust to today's issues. So I think it'll vary a little bit based on what audience you're trying to reach. But I think the format is usually the same, just kind of like introducing yourself and stand, kind of doing something about where you have shared interests, and then saying like, here is one thing that we're working on. Would you be interested in talking more with me about this or other issues? We'd love to, develop a relationship with you and work together throughout the year. Something like that. Does anyone else have ideas, or like folks who have had some success? Does that kind of ring true in terms of the types of things that you've written to organizations? I can call on Amala and Sav because I know they've both done a bit of outreach.
Something that I thought about, and this is clearly only relevant in like your regional and your local context, but part of the reason that you are state advocacy is that you're supposed to be meeting with like groups and individuals in your own communities and at your own schools. And I would say cold outreach often goes better when they realize that you're in the local area and have the potential to meet with you to chat about these things in person. So sometimes I suggest like do, a really personable cold outreach email or convey a few of your priorities back and forth. But if you can meet them in person, that can be really, really valuable in addition. And then that improves the likelihood that you guys will stay in touch via email if you've met in person.
And then I guess like one other thing to add as a potential idea for outreach. I know when I was in high school and doing organizing in my town, a lot of like religious organizations and, churches, synagogues, mosques, etc., have a really big social justice mandate and are very interested in international issues. And so this is going to vary based on like where you're based. But a lot of, churches do a lot of refugee resettlement and things like that. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we can be creative about reaching out to different, like very local organizations. So like Megan, for example, I know you were talking about like, how the heck am I going to reach like Northern California? I think even if you're just reaching like very local institutions in the LA and like kind of just out of LA, like Southern California area, I think honestly that's totally fine. And that's really aligned with what we want to do, because California has like 60 representatives or something. And I think like, forming the in-person relationships is something that I would really prioritize because I think it'll be more fruitful.
Mm-hmm.
Amala, do you have any thoughts that you want to share from when you were a regional organizer?
I agree with everything that's been said. I don't remember if this was said actually, but something I found really effective was offering to, actually I think this might have been said, but was offering to set up a call with them when you email them just to go over any questions they have and fully explain STAND to them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Does anyone else have any thoughts or questions or just topics that they'd like to chat about? Cool. Well, it sounds like we have covered most topics, but definitely keep on us on Slack. We'd love to see people using that more for dialogue, especially if we're doing these chats once a month. It's just a really good way to stay in touch when we are not having regular calls. But always feel free to message us if you have questions or need a little bit more guidance on something. We are here to help. And yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for being on. Thanks to Amala for leading. And we will talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.